Hi, my name is Jordan Segis with the Next Step Planning and Education. This is part 4 of the NextStep Career Guide. Basically, do you want to do good, and here's how to choose an area to focus on. The most pressing problems. So, if you want to make a difference with your career, one place to start is to ask which global problems most need attention. Should you work on education, climate change, poverty, or something else? The standard advice is to do whatever most interests you, and most people seem to end up working on whichever social problem first grabs their attention. That's exactly what Ben did when he was 19. He decided he was most interested in climate change. His focus on climate change wasn't the result of a careful comparison of the pros and cons of different areas. Rather, by his own admission, he happened to read about it and found it engaging because it was a little bit sciencey. The problem with this approach is that you might happen to stumble upon an area that's just not that big, important, or easy to make progress on. You're also much more likely to stumble across the problems that already receive the most attention, which makes them lower impact. So how to avoid these mistakes and do more good? We've developed 3 questions to ask yourself to work out which social problems are most urgent, where an extra year of work would have the greatest impact. It's based on work by the Open Philanthropy Group, a foundation with billions of dollars of committed funds, and the modestly named Future of Humanity Institute, a research group out of Oxford. So you can use these steps to compare areas you could enter: education, health, etc. Or if you're already committed to an area, you can compare projects within that area, research into malaria, HIV. So the bottom line, the most pressing problems are likely to have a good combination of the following 3 qualities. Are they big in scale? What's the magnitude of the problem? How much does it affect people's lives today? How much effect will solving it have in the long term? The second quality is it neglected? How many people and resources are already dedicated to tackling this problem, and how well allocated are the resources that are currently being dedicated to the problem? Are there good reasons why markets or governments aren't already making progress to that problem? The third quality is solvability. How easy would it be to make progress on this problem? Do interventions already exist to solve the problem effectively, and how strong is the evidence behind them? To find the problem you should work on, also consider your personal fit. Could you become motivated to work on this problem? If you're later in your career, do you have relevant expertise? So the one thing that we need to figure out is the problem large in scale? We tend to assess the importance of different social problems using our intuition, what seems important on a gut level. For instance, in 2005, the BBC wrote, "The nuclear power stations will all be switched off in a few years. How can we keep Britain's lights on?" Unplug your mobile phone charger when it's not in use. So, this annoyed David McKay, a physics professor at Cambridge, that he decided to focus basically on exactly how bad is leaving your mobile phone plugged in. How bad is it really? You can see the story of his attempt to find out. The bottom line is that even if no mobile phone charger were ever left plugged in again, Britain would save at most 0.01% of its personal power usage. And that's leaving aside industrial usage and the like. So even if entirely successful, a quick estimate shows that this BBC campaign could have no noticeable effect. McKay said it was like trying to bail out the Titanic with a tea strainer. Instead, that effort could have been used to change behavior in a way that could have easily had 100 times as large of an impact on climate change. And for example, one would be installing home insulation. Decades of research has shown that our intuition is bad at assessing differences in scale. For instance, one study found that people were willing to pay about the same amount to save 2,000 birds from oil spills as they were to save 200,000 birds, even though the latter is objectively 100 times better. This is an example of a common error called scope neglect. Rather, we need to use numbers to make comparisons, even if they're very rough. In the previous article, podcast, video, we said that social impact depends on the extent to which you help others live better lives. So based on this definition, a problem has greater scale if it has greater scale if the larger the number of people affected, the larger the size of the effects per person, and the larger the long-run benefits of solving the problem. Scale is important because the effect of activities on a problem is often proportional to the size of the problem. Launch a campaign that ends 10% of phone charger problems and you achieve very little. Launch a campaign that persuades 10% of people to install home insulation, and it's a much bigger deal. Second thing to do is work on a problem that's neglected. In the previous article, video, podcast, we saw that medicine in the United States, United Kingdom, is a relatively crowded problem. There are already over 700,000 doctors in the United States, and health spending is high, which makes it harder for an extra person working on health to make a big contribution. Health in poor countries, however, receives much less attention, and that's one reason why it's possible to save a life for only $7,500. More effort that's already going into a problem, the harder it is for you to be successful and make a meaningful contribution. This is due to diminishing returns. When you pick fruit from a tree, you start with those that are easiest to reach, the low-hanging fruit. When they're gone, it becomes harder and harder to get a meal. It's the same with social impact. When few people have worked on a problem, there are generally lots of great opportunities to make progress. As more and more work is done, it becomes harder and harder to be original and have a big impact. So, the problems your friends are talking about and that you see in the news are where everyone else is already focused. So, they're not the neglected problems and probably not the most urgent. Rather, the most urgent problems, those where you have the greatest impact, are probably areas you've never even thought about working on. We all know about the fight against cancer, but what about parasitic worms? It doesn't make for much a good charity music video, but these little tiny creatures have infected 1 billion people worldwide with neglected tropical diseases. These conditions are far easier to treat than cancer, but we never even hear about them because they very rarely affect rich people. So instead of following the trend, seek out problems that other people are systematically missing. For instance, does the problem affect neglected groups, like those in a long way away, animals, or our grandchildren rather than us? Is the problem a low probability event, which might be getting overlooked? And do few people know about the problem? Following this advice is harder than it looks because it means standing out from the crowd, and that might mean looking a little weird. Third thing to focus on is work on problems that are solvable. Lots of charity programs just don't work. Here's an example in the field of reducing youth crime. I'm sure you all heard of Scared Straight. It's a program that takes kids who have committed misdemeanors to visit prisons and meet convicted criminals, confronting them with their likely future if they don't change their ways. The concept proved popular not just as a social program, but as entertainment. It was adapted for both an acclaimed documentary and a TV show on A&E, which broke ratings records for the network upon its premiere. There's just one problem with Scared Straight. It's probably causing young people to commit more crimes. Or more precisely, the young people who went through the program did commit fewer crimes than they did before. So superficially, it looked like it worked, but the decrease was smaller compared to similar young people who never went through the program. The effect is so significant that the Washington State Institute for Public Policy estimated that each dollar spent on Scared Straight programs caused more than $200 worth of social harm. This estimate seems a little too pessimistic to us, but even so, it looks like it was a huge mistake. No one is sure why this is, but it might be because the young people realized that life in jail wasn't as bad as they thought, or they came to admire the criminals. Some attempts to do good, like Scared Straight, make things worse. Many more fail to have an impact. David Anderson of the Coalition for Evidence-Based Policy estimates of social programs that have been rigorously evaluated, most perhaps 75% or more, including those backed by expert opinion and less rigorous studies, turn out to produce small or no effects, and in some cases, negative effects. This suggests that if you choose a charity to get involved in without looking at the evidence, you'll most likely have no impact at all. Worse, it's very hard to tell which programs are going to be effective ahead of time. Don't believe us? There's a 10-question quiz on our website. You can guess basically what's effective. So before you choose a social problem, ask yourself these 3 questions. Is there a way to make progress on this problem with rigorous evidence behind it? For instance, lots of studies have shown that malaria nets prevent malaria. 2, is this an attempt to try out a new but promising program to test whether it works? And 3, is this a program with a small but realistic chance of making a massive impact, for instance, research into a key question or a political campaign? If the answer to all of these is no, then it's probably best to find something else. Look for the best balance of the factors. You probably won't find something that does brilliantly on all 3 dimensions. Rather, look for what does best on balance. A problem could be worth tackling if it's extremely big and neglected, even if it seems hard to solve. Your personal fit and expertise. There's no point working on a problem if you can't find any roles that are a good fit for you. You won't be satisfied or have much impact. So once you've identified problems that have a good combination of being big, neglected, and solvable, consider all the roles you could have to contribute to them. We cover this in a later article, video, and podcast. Also, narrow those down based on where you expect to be most successful. We'll discuss how to assess your own personal fit in the next video, audio, and article. If you're already an expert in a problem, then it's probably best to work within your area of expertise. It wouldn't make sense for, say, an economist who's crushing it to switch into something totally different. However, you could still use the framework to narrow down subfields, development economics versus employment policy. So, what's the world's most urgent problem? What are the biggest problems in the world that no one is talking about and are possible to solve? And that's what we'll cover next. We'll cover that next in part 5, which is what are the world's biggest problems. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen, to read, to watch this video of part 4 of the Next Step Planning and Education Career Guide. This was the most pressing problems and what to focus on. So go to the next video, audio, podcast, article to find out how, basically to figure out what are the world's biggest problems in part 5.